one of the most dangerous things about disrespect is that it rarely begins with something obvious. Most people imagine disrespect as yelling, insults, or open hostility. But psychologically, disrespect usually starts much smaller. It starts with interruptions, dismissive tones, sarcasm disguised as humor, subtle invalidation, someone talking over you repeatedly, someone treating your time like it has no value. And what makes these moments powerful is not the behavior itself, it's the response to the behavior. Human beings are constantly studying each other. Every social interaction is a negotiation of boundaries, status, and emotional tolerance. Most of this happens unconsciously. People watch your reactions to determine what they can continue doing around you. In behavioral psychology, repeated tolerated behavior becomes conditioned permission. In simple terms, whatever you allow consistently becomes the standard people associate with you. That's why the first moment of disrespect matters so much. Most people fail in that moment because emotion takes control before awareness does. The instinct is to defend yourself, explain yourself, or convince the other person to understand you. They're your value, but the need to explain yourself excessively is often rooted in fear, not confidence. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of losing connection. Especially for people with anxious attachment patterns, disrespect creates an internal panic. They think if they can just say the right words, prove their intentions, or stay emotionally agreeable, the other person will finally respond with respect. But psychologically, that almost never works. In fact, over-explaining often lowers perceived status in a social interaction. Because when someone is disrespecting you and you immediately begin defending your worth, you unconsciously position them as the judge and yourself as the applicant seeking approval. Strong people do not beg for emotional recognition. They observe behavior, and they respond accordingly. This is where most people misunderstand confidence. Confidence is not loudness. It is not aggression. It is not dominance theater. Real confidence is emotional stability under pressure. It is the ability to remain internally composed while someone else is attempting to pull you into emotional chaos. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Disrespect grows. Where boundaries collapse, people test limits naturally, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. A manipulative person tests to gain control. An insecure person tests to gain reassurance. Even socially dominant personalities test simply to establish hierarchy. But regardless of the reason, the human brain pays attention to what happens after the test. If someone dismisses you and nothing happens, the brain registers acceptance. If someone violates a boundary and you laugh nervously, over-accommodate, or remain silent while internally resentful, then you are not in a position to help. You have unintentionally taught them that access to you comes without accountability. This is why emotionally secure people seem different in conversation. They do not rush to repair tension that they did not create. That's important. Most emotionally exhausted people spend their lives trying to stabilize environments created by disrespectful individuals. Secure people don't do that. They remain calm enough to let silence expose the behavior. And silence is powerful because disrespect often survives through emotional confusion. The disrespectful person expects you to react impulsively. They expect defensiveness, emotional flooding, self-justification. The moment you stay composed, you interrupt the pattern. You force awareness into the interaction. Suddenly the issue becomes visible, because the strongest boundaries are not usually spoken first. They are communicated through presence, through posture, through eye contact, through the absence of desperation, through the willingness to emotionally detach from someone who repeatedly violates respect. People can sense when someone fears losing them, and they can also sense when someone respects themselves enough to walk away. That changes everything. The moment you stop trying to convince people to value you, you begin seeing who already does and who never intended to. And that awareness alone will save you years of emotional damage, because the people who truly respect you rarely require repeated reminders to treat you with dignity. There's a reason most people freeze when they're disrespected. The brain interprets social rejection and humiliation as a threat. Neurologically, the nervous system reacts to disrespect in ways that are surprisingly similar to physical danger. Heart rate increases, emotional processing narrows, the instinct becomes survival, not strategy. And in that state, people usually fall into one of two traps. They either become emotionally explosive or emotionally submissive. Both reactions surrender control. The explosive person loses control outwardly. The submissive person loses control inwardly. But psychologically, both are still reacting from the same place. Emotional dependence on the other person's behavior. That's why the sentence matters. Not because it's magical, not because words alone change people, but because the right sentence forces you into a state of emotional clarity instead of emotional reactivity. And the sentence is simple. I'm not going to continue this conversation if disrespect is part of it. Notice what's absent from that statement. There's no insult, no threat, no emotional performance, no need to dominate the other person. It's calm, direct, neutral. And that neutrality is exactly what makes it psychologically disruptive. Most disrespectful people expect one thing: emotional participation. They expect anger so they can call you unstable. They expect defensiveness so they can stay in control. They expect explanations so they can keep moving the goalposts. But calm bounda, CRY setting creates what behavioral experts call a pattern interruption. You suddenly stop feeding the emotional dynamic they were unconsciously relying on. And when that happens, people become uncomfortable because emotional manipulators thrive in ambiguity. They thrive when the conversation becomes emotional fog, when you're busy defending your intentions instead of observing their behavior. A calm sentence removes the fog instantly. It shifts the focus away from your emotions and back onto their actions. That's power, not power in the sense of dominance, power in the sense of self-governance. Most people think strength means winning the argument. It doesn't. Strength is maintaining authority over your own nervous system while someone else is attempting to destabilize it. And this connects deeply to attachment psychology. Someone with anxious attachment often fears that boundaries will create abandonment. So when disrespect appears, they instinctively soften themselves. They over-explain. They apologize for reacting. They tolerate behavior they internally hate because preserving connection feels safer than preserving self-respect. But secure attachment operates differently. Secure people understand something most emotionally reactive people never learn. Boundaries do not destroy healthy relationships. They expose unhealthy ones. That changes the entire interaction. When a secure person says, "I'm not going to continue this conversation if disrespect is part of it," they are not attempting to control the other person. They are defining the conditions under which they themselves are willing to participate. That distinction matters enormously. Control says, "You must change." Boundaries say, "I will change my level of access if this behavior continues." One is manipulation. The other is self-respect. And here's where people make a critical mistake. They think calmness means weakness. But controlled emotional energy is one of the rarest forms of strength in modern communication. Anyone can become aggressive. Anyone can yell. Anyone can lose composure. Very few people can remain centered while being provoked. That kind of restraint immediately changes the social dynamic, because composed people are difficult to manipulate. They force accountability into the room. Their emotional stability removes the reward. Disrespectful individuals are often seeking, and the sentence itself works because it contains consequence without aggression. You are not attacking the person. You are identifying the behavior and removing your participation from it. Psychologically, this creates cognitive friction. The other person suddenly realizes they can no longer access you through intimidation, guilt, sarcasm, or emotional pressure. That's when the balance shifts. Not because you became cruel, but because you stopped volunteering your emotional energy to someone who was mishandling it. And once people realize you are willing to walk away from disrespect instead of negotiating with it, they begin interacting with you differently. Some will rise to your standards, others will disappear. Both outcomes are useful, because your life changes the moment you stop asking, "How do I make people respect me?" and start asking, "Why am I giving unlimited access to people who clearly don't?" One of the biggest psychological shifts a person can make is learning to stop over-participating in disrespect. Most people don't realize how much emotional energy they hand over during conflict. They explain too much, defend too much, react too quickly. And the time, the disrespectful person is gaining something valuable: emotional control over the interaction. That's why toxic people become deeply uncomfortable when you stop explaining yourself, because explanation is often a form of permission. When someone continuously twists your words, dismisses your feelings, or intentionally misunderstands your intentions, and you keep trying harder to clarify yourself, you unknowingly enter a psychological trap. The conversation stops being about truth and starts becoming about emotional exhaustion. The manipulative person keeps you focused on proving your innocence while they avoid accountability for their behavior. And this dynamic is incredibly common. Passive-aggressive personalities do it. Narcissistic personalities do it. Emotionally immature people do it constantly. They create confusion because confusion weakens clarity, and clarity is dangerous to anyone relying on manipulation. If they can keep you emotionally spinning, defending, apologizing, overanalyzing, they stay in control of the frame. This is why calm detachment feels so threatening to them. The moment you stop chasing understanding from someone committed to misunderstand, ending you, the entire structure collapses. And you'll notice something fascinating when you begin responding differently. The same people who once seemed powerful suddenly become emotionally agitated the moment they can no longer provoke you. Why? Because many toxic individuals unconsciously depend on emotional reactions for reassurance, dominance, or stimulation. Your reaction validates their influence. When the reaction disappears, so does the illusion of control. That's why silence can become psychologically disruptive. Now, silence does not mean weakness. It does not mean avoidance. It means refusing to feed a dysfunctional dynamic. There's a major difference. Emotionally intelligent silence is deliberate. It allows the other person's behavior to become visible without interruption. Most people talk too much during conflict because they are trying to reduce discomfort. But discomfort is often where truth becomes visible. Watch what happens when you stay calm after someone disrespects you. Really watch carefully. The manipulative person usually escalates first. They become more sarcastic, more dismissive, more emotionally reactive. Why? Because they are testing whether you can regain emotional access to you. And the moment you refuse to emotionally chase them, something important happens internally. You stop seeing them as an authority over your self-worth. That is a profound psychological transition, because many people are still unconsciously operating from childhood conditioning. If approval was inconsistent growing up, the nervous system becomes trained to seek validation from emotionally difficult people. The brain starts associating emotional unpredictability with value. That's why some people feel almost addicted to fixing toxic relationships. They are not pursuing love. They are pursuing resolution. But resolution never comes from surrendering your boundaries. It comes from recognizing that not every person deserves unlimited emotional access to you. And this is where body language becomes incredibly important. Calm eye contact, slower speech, relaxed posture, strategic pauses. These signals communicate emotional certainty far more powerfully than aggressive words ever could. Human beings are highly responsive to nonverbal communication. Long before people analyze your language consciously, they are reacting to your emotional state subconsciously. A calm nervous system changes the room. That's why emotionally secure people often appear intimidating without trying to be. They are not easily pulled into emotional chaos. And people who rely on emotional manipulation quickly realize their usual tools are ineffective. No excessive defending. No desperate need to be understood. No emotional panic. Just clarity. And clarity is difficult to control. This is also why emotionally mature individuals become selective with their energy. They understand that not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every insult deserves engagement. Not every disrespectful person deserves access, because attention itself is valuable. The strongest people are not the ones who can verbally destroy others. The strongest people are the ones who remain internally stable while deciding who is no longer worthy of their emotional investment. And once you understand that, you stop trying to win toxic conversations. You start protecting your peace instead, because the ultimate power move is not making someone fear you. It's becoming someone who no longer fears losing people who disrespect you. At the deepest level, this conversation not really about a sentence. It's not about the perfect comeback, the perfect boundary, or the perfect psychological tactic. Those things matter, but they are only surface-level expressions of something much deeper. The real issue is identity, specifically what you believe you deserve emotionally, because people rarely tolerate disrespect accidentally. Most of the time, they tolerate it because somewhere in their conditioning, they learned that preserving connection was more important than preserving self-respect. And that conditioning often begins early. A person who grows up constantly needing approval learns to monitor the emotional state of others obsessively. They become highly adaptive, highly accommodating, highly sensitive to rejection. On the surface, this can look like kindness, but underneath it is often fear. Fear that conflict will lead to abandonment. fear that boundaries will make people leave, fear that saying enough will cost them love, so they develop survival strategies. They become agreeable, over-understanding, excessively patient with harmful behavior. They convince themselves that tolerance is maturity, but there's a difference between compassion and self-erasure. Emotionally healthy people understand that empathy should never require self-betrayal. And this is where the entire transformation begins. The moment you realize that self-respect is not something granted by other people, it is something enforced by your standards. That changes the way you walk into every interaction. Because truly secure individuals do not spend their lives trying to force others to value them. They observe behavior carefully, and they make decisions accordingly. If someone repeatedly disrespects them, manipulates them, dismisses them, or violates boundaries, they do not endlessly negotiate their worth. They reduce access. That's emotional maturity. Not becoming cold, not becoming arrogant, not becoming emotionally detached from humanity, but becoming disciplined enough to stop handing your nervous system to people who misuse it. And this is difficult because the human brain is wired for attachment. People naturally seek belonging. Social rejection activates real pain centers in the brain. This is why walking away from toxic relationships can feel psychologically overwhelming, even when you know the relationship is unhealthy. Your logic understands the DE, their damage, but your nervous system still fears the separation. That's why emotionally secure behavior often feels uncomfortable at first. Saying no feels uncomfortable. Holding silence feels uncomfortable. Leaving disrespectful environments feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always danger. Sometimes discomfort is simply evidence that you are breaking an old emotional pattern. And that pattern is what keeps many people trapped. They continue tolerating disrespect because they confuse familiarity with safety. If chaos feels familiar, peace feels suspicious. If emotional inconsistency feels familiar, healthy boundaries feel unnatural. So they unconsciously return to people who drain them because unpredictability has become psychologically normalized. But eventually, a person reaches a point where exhaustion creates clarity. They realize they are tired of shrinking themselves to maintain relationships that require self-abandonment, tired of rehearsing conversations in their head, tired of over-explaining their intentions to people committed to misunderstanding them, tired of feeling emotionally anxious around people who claim to care about them. And that's the moment real change begins. Not when you learn manipulation tactics, not when you memorize confident phrases, but when you genuinely decide that your inner stability matters more than external approval. Because the truth is, boundaries reveal reality. Healthy people respect them. Toxic people resent them. Emotionally mature people adjust their behavior. Manipulative people attack the boundary itself because boundaries remove control. And once you understand this, you stop taking disrespect personally. You begin seeing it diagnostically. A person's response to your boundaries tells you everything about their intentions. That awareness is freedom, because emotionally strong people are not fearless. They still feel disappointment. They still feel hurt. They still feel loss. The difference is that they no longer allow those emotions to override their standards. They are willing to lose connection in order to keep self-respect. And ironically, that is often the moment they begin attracting healthier relationships for the first time in their lives. Because when a person finally believes they deserve respect, their entire presence changes. Their tone changes. Their choices change. Their tolerance changes. CR energy becomes harder to manipulate because it is no longer rooted in desperation. And in the end, the most powerful sentence you will ever say to disrespect is not spoken with your mouth first. It is spoken through the standards you refuse to abandon.